Chapter 23 of Colonel Quaritch, V.C. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Colonel Quaritch, V.C. by H. Rider Haggart. Chapter 23. The Blow Falls. On the following morning, about 10 o'clock, while Edward Cossey was still at breakfast, a dog-cart drew up at his door, and out of it stepped Colonel Quaritch. "Now for the row," he said to himself. "I hope that the governor was right in his tale, that's all. Perhaps it would have been wiser to say nothing till I had made more sure." And he poured out some more tea, a little nervously, for in the Colonel he felt an adversary not to be despised. Presently the door opened and Colonel Quaritch was announced. He rose and bowed a salutation, which the Colonel, whose face bore a particularly grim expression, did not return. "Will you take a chair?" he said, as soon as the servant had left, and without speaking the Colonel took one, and presently began the conversation. "Last night, Mr. Cossey," he said, "you thought proper to publicly bring a charge against me, which, if it were true, would go a long way towards showing that I was not a fit person to associate with those before whom it was brought." "Yes," said Edward coolly. "Before making any remarks on your conduct in bringing such a charge, which I give you credit for believing to be true, I propose to show to you that it is a false charge," went on the Colonel quietly. "The story is a very simple one, and so sad that nothing short of necessity would force me to tell it. I was, when quite young, engaged to your aunt, Miss Heston, to whom I was much attached, and who was then 20 years of age. And though I had little besides my profession, she had some money, and we were going to be married. The circumstances under which the marriage was broken off were as follows. 3 days before the wedding was to take place, I went unexpectedly to the house, and was told by the servant that Miss Heston was upstairs in her sitting room. I went upstairs to the room, which I knew well, knocked and got no answer. Then I walked into the room, and this is what I saw. Your aunt was lying on the sofa in her wedding dress, that is, in half of it, for she had only the skirt on. As I first thought, asleep. I went up to her and saw that by her side was a brandy bottle half empty. In her hand also was a glass containing raw brandy. While I was wondering what it could mean, she woke up, got off the sofa, and began to stagger round the room, and I saw that she was intoxicated." "It's a lie," said Edward excitedly. "Be careful what you say, sir," answered the Colonel, "and wait to say it till I have done. As soon as I realised what the matter was, I left the room again, and going down to your grandfather's study, where he was engaged in writing a sermon, I asked him to come upstairs, as I was afraid that his daughter was not well. He came and saw, and the sight threw him off his balance, for he broke out into a torrent of explanations and excuses, from which in time I extracted the following facts. It appeared that ever since she was a child, Miss Heston has been addicted to drinking fits, and that it was on account of this constitutional weakness, which was of course concealed from me, that she had been allowed to engage herself to a penniless subaltern. It appeared too that the habit was hereditary, for her mother had died from the effects of drink, and one of her aunts had become mad from it. I went away and thought the matter over, and came to the conclusion that under these circumstances it would be impossible for me, much as I was attracted to her, to marry her, because even if I was willing to do so, I had no right to run the risk of bringing children into the world who might inherit the curse. Having come to this determination, which it cost me much to do, I wrote and communicated it to your grandfather, and the marriage was broken off." "I do not believe it. I do not believe a word of it," said Edward, jumping up. "You jilted her and drove her mad, and now you are trying to shelter yourself behind a tissue of falsehoods." "Are you acquainted with your grandfather's handwriting?" asked the Colonel quietly. "Yes." "Is that it?" he went on, producing a yellow-looking letter and showing it to him. "I believe so, at least it looks like it." "Then read the letter." Edward obeyed. It was one written in answer to that of Harold Quaritch to his betrothed father, and admitted in the clearest terms the justice of the step that he had taken. Further, it begged him, for the sake of Julia and the family at large, never to mention the cause of his defection to anyone outside the family. "Are you satisfied, Mr. Cossey? I have other letters if you wish to see them." Edward made no reply, and the Colonel went on. "I gave the promise that your grandfather asked for, and in spite of the remarks that were freely made upon my behaviour, I kept it, as it was my duty to do. You, Mr. Cossey, are the first person to whom the story has been told, and now that you have thought fit to make accusations against me which are without foundation, I must ask you to retract them as fully as you made them. I have prepared a letter which you will be so good as to sign," and he handed him a note addressed to the Squire. It ran: "Dear Mr. de la Molle, I beg in the fullest and most ample manner possible to retract the charges which I made yesterday evening against Colonel Quaritch in the presence of yourself and Miss de la Molle. I find that those charges were unfounded, and I hereby apologise to Colonel Quaritch for having made them." "And supposing that I refuse to sign?" said Edward sulkily. "I do not think," answered the Colonel, "that you will refuse." Edward looked at Colonel Quaritch, and the Colonel looked at Edward. "Well," said the Colonel, "please understand that I mean you should sign that letter, and indeed, seeing how absolutely you are in the wrong, I do not think that you can hesitate to do so." Then very slowly and unwillingly Edward Cossey took up a pen, affixed his signature to the letter, blotted and pushed it from him. The Colonel folded it up, placed it in an envelope which he had ready, and put it in his pocket. "Now, Mr. Cossey," he said, "I will wish you good morning. Another time I should recommend you to be more careful both in the facts and the manner of your accusations," and with a slight bow he left the room. "Curse the fellow," thought Edward to himself as the front door closed. "He had me there. I was forced to sign. Well, I will be even with him about Ida at any rate. I will propose to her this very day, Bella or no Bella, and if she won't have me I will call the money in and smash the whole thing." And his handsome face bore a very evil look as he thought it. That very afternoon he started, in accordance with this design, to pay a visit at the Castle. The Squire was out, but Miss de la Molle was at home, the servant said, and accordingly he was ushered into the drawing room where Ida was working, for it was a wet and windy afternoon. She rose to greet him coldly enough, and he sat down, and then came a pause which she did not seem inclined to break. At last he spoke. "Did the Squire get my letter, Miss de la Molle?" he asked. "Yes," she answered rather icily. "Colonel Quaritch sent it up." "I am very sorry," he added confusedly, "that I should have put myself in such a false position. I hope that you will give me credit for having believed my accusation when I made it." "Such accusations should not be made lightly, Mr. Cossey," was her answer, and as though to turn the subject she rose and rang the bell for tea. It came, and the bustle connected with it prevented any further conversation for a while. At length, however, it subsided, and once more Edward found himself alone with Ida. He looked at her and felt afraid. The woman was of a different clay to himself, and he knew it. He loved her, but he did not understand her in the least. However, if the thing was to be done at all, it must be done now. So with a desperate effort he screwed himself up to the point. "Miss de la Molle," he said, and Ida, knowing full surely what was coming, felt her heart jump within her bosom and then stand still. "Miss de la Molle," he went on, "perhaps you will remember a conversation that we had some weeks ago in the conservatory." "Yes," she said, "I remember, about the money." "About the money and other things," he said, gathering courage. "I hinted to you then that I hoped in certain contingencies to be allowed to make my addresses to you, and I think that you understood me." "I understood you perfectly," answered Ida, her pale face set like ice, "and I gave you to understand that in the event of your lending my father the money I should hold myself bound to listen to what you had to say." "Oh, curse the money," broke in Edward. "It is not a question of money with me, Ida, it is not indeed. I love you with all my heart. I have loved you ever since I saw you. It was because I was jealous of him that I made a fool of myself last night with Colonel Quaritch. I should have